Good morning. Grab your coffee, pull up a chair, and let's talk about that house you're sitting in right now. You probably think of it as your greatest asset, right? Your castle, your retirement plan, your piece of the American dream. But here's the deal, right now as we speak, that home is being quietly drafted as a $5 trillion insurance policy for buildings that no longer have a reason to exist. I know, sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually just math. And the math, quite frankly, is getting very, very tricky. Let's look at the horizon. If you walk through downtown San Francisco, New York, or Chicago today, you'll see these massive glass giants. They look fine from the outside, but inside, they're ghosts. The national office vacancy rate just hit 20.5%. Think about that. 1 out of every 5 desks in this country is empty. In San Francisco, that number is 35%. 35! That's not a temporary dip. That's a structural desert, and this is the part you need to pay attention to. Those empty desks are starting to burn a hole in your pocket, even if you've never stepped foot in a skyscraper in your life. Here's where it gets interesting. For decades, cities have treated their commercial districts like a magic ATM. These office towers provided up to 70% of the tax base in cities like Boston. They paid for the roads, the police, the schools, and the parks. But the ATM is flashing out of order. When a building loses half its tenants, its value doesn't just drop, it craters. And when the value craters, the tax bill follows it down. So if the glass giants are standing empty and bankrupt, who's going to pay for the city services they used to fund? Let that sink in for a second. The answer is looking at you in the mirror. Okay, let's talk about the real problem, the one the headlines are finally starting to catch up with. It's called the municipal revenue black hole. See, cities have a fixed cost. You can't just stop paving the roads or fire half the police force because a tech company decided everyone can work from their pajamas. But the revenue, that's disappearing. Take Boston. They're staring at a $550 million annual deficit. New York City? They've lost $29 billion in office value already. This is what economists call a terminal revenue decline. And here is where the story takes a turn. There is a $2.2 trillion maturity wall hitting us right now. Between now and the end of 2026, over $2 trillion in commercial debt has to be refinanced. But here's the catch. These buildings were financed when rates were at 0 or 3%. Now they're looking at 7 or 8%. The math just stops working. When the math stops working, the landlords hand the keys back to the bank. And when the bank takes the building, the city's tax assessment falls off a cliff. So how does a city bridge a $500 million gap? They can't just print money. They have to find a new donor. And that donor is your driveway. We're seeing a policy shift, a tax shift, where cities are aggressively reassessing residential values to fill the commercial void. In places like Ohio and California, we're already seeing tweaks to tax laws that allow for these surcharges. We're talking about a projected 15 to 20% hike in residential property taxes, just to keep the lights on downtown. You aren't just a homeowner anymore, you've been drafted as the unwilling guarantor of a $5 trillion commercial debt. I know, it's a lot to take in before your second cup of coffee. But look at the data. This isn't a theory, it's the new blueprint for municipal survival. Now, this is the part I find wild. You might think, hey, I live in a small town, I don't care about San Francisco's office space, but this is a web, and you're caught in it whether you like it or not. The IMF estimates that the global loss in commercial real estate value is roughly $1.2 trillion, but it's the contagion that should have you checking your 401 key. European banks are sitting on 185 billion euros of exposure to US office space. South Korean insurance giants? They've got 45 billion on the line. Even Japanese banks like Aozora just saw their profits drop by nearly 30% because of losses on, you guessed it, US office buildings. Think about that. A pension fund in London and an insurance company in Seoul are both betting on the idea that people will eventually go back to 5 days a week in a cubicle. Spoiler alert, they aren't. We are witnessing a synchronized global default. It's a slow-motion wreck that ripples through international liquidity. When these big institutions take a hit on a ghost building in Chicago, they pull back on lending everywhere. They tighten the screws on small business loans, on car loans, and yes, on mortgages. And honestly, this is the most interesting part of the whole story. While the smart money is trying to find the exit ramp, they're leaving the local homeowner holding the bag. Capital is incredibly mobile. It can flee a zombie city in a keystroke, but your house is stuck. You can't move your property to a different tax jurisdiction when the city decides it needs an extra $5,000 from you this year. It's a fascinating, if somewhat brutal trap. The smartest money in the room isn't sticking around to help rebuild. They're weaving an exit through a global network of capital, leaving you to fund the services that the skyscrapers used to cover. Let's zoom out for a second. Is this the first time we've seen this? Not quite. If we look back at the 1975 New York City fiscal crisis, the vibes are remarkably similar. Back then, the city was broke, the streets were piling up with trash, and the federal government famously told them to drop dead. But there's a massive difference this time around. In 1975, the problem was largely about cash flow and labor costs. It was a sick patient that needed a temporary loan and some medicine today. As Barry Sternlicht of Starwood Capital argues, this is an existential impairment. See, the office isn't just sick, it's obsolete. We've discovered we don't need 1 billion square feet of Class B office space to run a modern economy. This means the revenue loss isn't a dip that recovers in 5 years. It's a permanent structural shift. Imagine trying to tax a horse and buggy factory in 1920 to pay for the new highways. It doesn't work. The revenue isn't coming back because the utility of the asset has changed forever. This is why the comparison to 1975 is so sobering. Back then, the solution was emergency loans and service cuts. Today, cities are looking at the math and realizing that loans won't fix a permanent hole. The only way out is to shift the burden. When Howard Marks from Oak Tree Capital talks about the immaturity wall, he's describing a reckoning. Many of these buildings are now worth less than the debt held against them. And when a private asset becomes a public liability, someone has to pay the tab. In 1975, it was the city workers. In 2026, it's the equity in your home. So, where does this leave your wallet? Let's bring it home. We're looking at a future where the average residential property tax hike isn't the usual 2 or 3%. We're talking 15 to 20%. For a $500,000 home, that's not just an extra bill, that's a direct erosion of your wealth. If your taxes go up by $2,000 a year, that's $2,000 less that a future buyer can afford to pay for your house. It's a hidden, silent drain on your equity. And look at the delinquency rates. CMBS, that's commercial mortgage-backed securities, delinquency is already at 7.3%. That's a 143% jump in just 3 years. The cracks are turning into canyons. We are also seeing a projected 4.5% increase in municipal bond defaults by 2026. This is the ghost building trap in its final form. You aren't just a homeowner, you are the unwilling guarantor of a failing system. You're paying for the ghost towers while they sit empty, waiting for a purpose that might never come back. But here's the most important takeaway: knowledge is the only hedge. While cities are trying to fill their revenue vacuum with your equity, capital is already moving elsewhere. We're seeing a massive shift into self-sustaining industrial zones, places powered by small modular reactors that bypass the failing municipal grids entirely. Companies like Amazon and Google are already making $500 million bets on this off-grid future. They're leaving the zombie cities behind. Your home hasn't moved an inch, but the ground beneath its value just shifted from a private asset to a government debt repayment tool. Something to think about next time you see your property tax assessment. I'm not saying the sky is falling, I'm saying the bill is coming, and now at least you know who it's addressed to.